Welcome back to the Algarve. Now, to all my regular viewers, can I just say at this point, no, this is not my new bike, but as there is still no news of the aforementioned, and as I've been riding around on my Honda Grom for the past 2.5 months, my good friend Danielle at Triumph Algarve took pity on me and kindly lent me his new 2022 T120 Bonneville demonstrator for the day. And I must say, it was nice to get back on a proper bike again. Now, I've ridden the Speed Twin and Thruxton a few times, but I've never tried any of the standard Bonnevilles. So I was keen to see how the T120 would fare with its 80 horsepower version of the 1200cc engine that puts out 100 or so in the sportier models. Coincidentally, and while being a completely different engine, the Trident I had during the first half of this year also has 80 horsepower, and I found that adequate in most situations, if not exactly scintillating. Thing is though, the T120 has almost twice the cubic capacity and almost twice the torque of the Trident, and it certainly is a looker with its lustrous paintwork and those gorgeous chrome pea shooter exhausts glistening in the sunshine. I was surprised to see that, at least in most European markets, the T120 is priced within a couple of €100 of the much better equipped Speed Twin, and in fact in the UK the two bikes cost exactly the same. Maybe it's the fit and finish on the T120, because on paper it looks a bit expensive compared to its sportier sibling. But what's it like to ride? The T120 is tuned for more low-down power, with maximum power coming in at just 6,500 revs and maximum torque of 105 newton meters at an almost cruiser-like 3,100 revs. The Speed basically gets more power by being allowed to rev higher, so you get the 100 horsepower but at 7,250 revs and 112 newton meters at 4,250 revs. So I guess it all comes down to your riding style and what you're looking for in a bike. I'll give the T120 a chance, but I'm looking forward to trying the new Speed Twin when it arrives, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. For today though, I've got this beautiful Bonneville in my favourite jet black paint scheme. For 2022 it's also offered in a two-tone red and silver or blue and silver, but these are €350 premiums, so personally I'd stay with the black as it's free and I think it also looks the best. It's a safe bet when you come to sell the bike, and it makes a good base for any customization work you might want to do. So let's start her up and see how she goes. The now obligatory dial sweep, not sure why that's so satisfying and reassuring, but it is. The graphics are simpler than on the Speed and the Thruxton, and all the better for it in my opinion. The exhaust note is sweet, deep and throaty like bikes used to be, so really hats off to the engineers at Triumph for pulling it off, despite the restrictions imposed by Euro 4, Euro 5, etc. Now, as I pull off the forecourt, I'm so happy they're still just about allowed to make engines like this. Buttery smooth and oh so meaty with all that torque. Gear changes are silky, although of course there's no quick shifter here, unlike on my Trident or on the Street Triple. I suppose Triumph's thinking that it's not in keeping with the classic pretensions of the Bonneville, and even the Speed Twin doesn't get the option. But I still think it would be nice to have, because acceleration is brisk, even with only 80 horsepower. Now granted, most of us don't need a quick shifter, but they're just such fun to use, and I think they should come as standard on all bikes. Given how modest the calipers look, I was pleasantly surprised by how good they were at slowing the bike down. The front brakes definitely feel up to the job, even though they're pretty basic two-piston Brembos on twin 310mm discs. The rear brake is also adequate, and combined they feel about as good as I was getting on the Trident, for example. Good, but not awesome then, and this point on its own would make me want to seriously consider the new Speed Twin with its sports bike Brembo M50s on 320mm discs. Brakes are so often overlooked in favour of engine power, but ever since I experienced the stopping power of the M50s on my 2017 Street Triple RS, I've always tried to go for bikes with over-engineered anchors. I ride like an old duffer most of the time and will probably never use the full power of any half-decent braking system, but oh, it's so nice to know it's there if I do need it. Same goes for tyres in my book too, and the T120 gets pretty ordinary and pretty skinny Pirellis. They do look the part, i.e. vintage, but they weren't that sticky when I pushed on a bit. Skinny tyres, a 190 on the front, a 150/70 on the rear, usually make for nimbler turning, but the relatively narrow bars and the fact that the front wheel is 18-inch rather than the more common 17-inch, presumably for that authentic retro look once again, meant the T120 was relatively hard work getting round the tight roundabouts here on the M125, like this one. Much easier than on the Rocket, of course, but the Trident feels a lot nimbler in the bends and just, well, more modern. The T120 gets the same rear shocks that Triumph seem to like using across the range of modern classics. And this is a pity, because while they do work okay, at least if you're not too enthusiastic, they look, in my opinion, absolutely terrible and completely at odds with the high quality fit and finish on the rest of the bike. Triumph are clearly cutting corners here, and it shows. The chrome cap at the top looks plastic and the spring just looks too thin and weak. Like twin exhausts, twin rear shocks look cool, but from an engineering point of view, they're simply not as good as a monoshock, because no two springs will ever compress in exactly the same way, and so you inevitably get very slight chassis flex over every bump. Even the more powerful Speed Twin uses the same shocks, although tweaked for the 2022 model to match the uprated front forks. But I think if I owned either of these bikes, the shocks would be the first thing I would swap out for something a bit plusher and just, well, less cheap looking. The seat looks as though it would be pretty uncomfortable, but it was better than you might imagine. There's not much padding, and it's all very church pew-like in keeping with the classic look of the bike. But even after an hour or so, I wasn't experiencing any numbness. I'd probably invest in one of those air gel cushion things if I was doing any serious miles, if only to raise the seat height a little and give my legs a little bit more room to unfold to the foot pegs. The clocks look very nice, and being analog of course are perfectly legible in all weather conditions, including the sunshine here in Portugal. The same can't be said of the small LCD screens that display secondary information at the bottom, like rain, selected gear and riding mode. Only two of these incidentally, road and rain. I can just about see them without my reading glasses, but given the average age of the Bonneville owner, I'm not sure that's good enough. I for one embrace modernity if it's done with taste, and I would happily see a twin version of the Trident's digital clock, or even the larger central screen like you get on the Kawasaki Z900 RS. So what does the engine feel like? Well, one thing I liked about the Trident was its low down usable torque, and in this respect the T120 excels. There's a lot more torque on tap, and it's available even lower down than on the Trident. This shouldn't come as a surprise, of course, as the Bonneville's engine is, to all intents and purposes, twice the size of the Trident's. Peak power is identical at 80 horsepower, but where the Trident can be revved, the T120 likes to remain more sedate, more gentlemanly, and so peak power is achieved at just 6,500 revs, as opposed to the Trident's 10,250. Incidentally, I am aware that the Trident and the Bonneville are two completely different bikes. It's just that I've ridden most bikes in the current Triumph lineup, and so I talk about what I know. There's a good chance many of you will also have some experience of Triumphs, and so I think that saying, for example, that the Bonneville's brakes are on a par with those of the Trident may speak to you. I suppose the closest competitor to the Bonneville range would be the Kawasaki Z900 RS, and I am trying to get a ride on the recently updated model, but my local dealer hasn't got their demonstrator in yet. So what about the oft vaunted fit and finish? Well, it's good, but I can't say I was blown away, to be honest. Maybe I'm just spending too much time with Triumphs and getting used to it, but the finish on the T120 didn't wow me that much, and on its own doesn't really justify the price tag. Yes, the paint is excellent, the clocks are nice, and the seat fabric is much nicer than the weird rubber stuff they used on the Trident. But while the Bonneville avoids the Trident's most glaring faux pas, there's still those rear shocks staring you in the face and reminding that you spent 14,000 euros on something that looks as if it's come out of a Christmas cracker. I haven't seen the new Z900 RS in person yet, but from the photos it looks as though Triumph is going to have to up its game a little. In a word, the T120 is a very good bike, but it's very expensive, and to be frank, I can't really see where the money's gone. Yes, it's got a sweet engine, smooth gear change, very good overall finish, and the oh so charming classic looks, but compared to the identically priced Speed Twin, the brakes are weaker, power is down, and suspension is very budget. Do you attach that much importance to spoked wheels, gated forks, and a chrome badge on the tank? I think if I really wanted the retro look that much, I'd be more tempted by the Royal Enfield Interceptor. Okay, it's not as nicely finished and the engine is down on power, but the rear shocks look and operate better than those on the T120, and the bike is half the price. On paper at least, the Kawasaki would seem to offer more, but the proof of the pudding is in the riding, as they say, so I really need to get my hands on one. The subject of the next video perhaps. As always, thanks for watching.